The ground beneath our feet is rarely as solid as it seems. It is a ledger of sorts. If you dig deep enough, you find the layers of time stacked like the pages of a dusty book. For decades, the history of the Americas felt like a closed case. We were told that the first people arrived about 13,000 years ago. They were the Clovis people. They carried distinct stone spears and followed the mammoths across a land bridge from Siberia. This narrative was neat and tidy. It fit the evidence we had at the time, but lately the Earth has begun to yield secrets that do not fit this story. We are finding traces of life that shouldn't be there. These are not just theories or whispers, they are physical, tangible marks left in the mud and stone. They force us to ask a difficult question. Could the first Americans have arrived tens of thousands of years earlier than we ever thought possible? In the vast white expanse of the Tularosa Basin in New Mexico, the desert holds a memory of a different world. This is White Sands National Park. Today it is a place of shifting gypsum dunes, but thousands of years ago it was a lush landscape of wetlands and lakes. In 2019, researchers found something remarkable in the dry lake bed of Lake Otero. They found footprints. These were not the tracks of animals alone, they were the footprints of humans. You can see them clearly in the ancient mud. There are the heavy prints of adults and the light, frantic steps of children. In one set of tracks, an adult appears to be carrying a heavy weight, perhaps a child, shifting it from hip to hip. Nearby, the massive tracks of a giant ground sloth and a mammoth cross their path. The real mystery surfaced when scientists dated the seeds found in the layers above and below these prints. They used radiocarbon dating on the seeds of an aquatic plant called ditch grass. The results were staggering. The footprints were pressed into the earth between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. This date creates a massive problem for the traditional timeline. At that time, massive ice sheets covered much of North America. These glaciers should have blocked any passage from the north. If people were already in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, how did they get there? The evidence suggests they were not just passing through. They were living, playing, and hunting in a landscape we thought was empty of humans. Not everyone accepts these dates. Some skeptics argue that the seeds might have absorbed old carbon from the lake water, making the dates appear much older than they are. This is a common hurdle in archaeology. One piece of data challenges the entire framework, and the framework pushes back. But White Sands is not an isolated case. At a place called the Topper Site, an archaeologist named Albert Goodyear decided to dig deeper. He looked beneath the layers where Clovis tools are usually found. Most experts said he would find nothing but sterile soil. Instead, he found stone flakes and tools that appeared to be shaped by human hands. These artifacts were buried in a layer of sediment that dated back 16,000 to 20,000 years. Some even suggested dates as old as 50,000 years. The reaction from the scientific community was cold. Critics argued that the tools were just rocks broken by natural forces. They claimed the dating was flawed. It is a recurring theme in this field. When a discovery threatens a long-held belief, the burden of proof becomes nearly impossible to meet. In central Texas, the Galt site offers another piece of the puzzle. For a long time, Galt was famous for its massive collection of Clovis artifacts, but when researchers dug further, they found a distinct cultural layer underneath. They found small, thin stone blades and scrapers made with a refined technique. These tools are different from the Clovis style. They are older, perhaps by several thousand years. This suggests that the Clovis culture didn't just appear out of nowhere. It may have evolved from an even older, more mysterious group of people. These early inhabitants were not just primitive wanderers, they were craftsmen. They had a social structure and a shared technology that spanned generations. We are left looking at a map of the Americas that is filling up with impossible dates. We see fire pits in Brazil that might be 30,000 years old. We see carved bones in Canada that hint at an ancient presence. The evidence is quiet, but it is persistent. It suggests that the history of humanity in this hemisphere is much longer and more complex than we were taught. We are not looking at a single wave of migration. We are likely looking at multiple groups arriving at different times, perhaps by boat along the coast. These traces of early life are more than just stones and bones. They are the echoes of people who lived, dreamed, and survived in a wild, glacial world. They built communities and passed down knowledge. Why did so much of their story disappear? Perhaps a great natural catastrophe wiped the slate clean. Maybe a shifting climate forced them into new lands where their traces were buried deeper. Or perhaps we have simply been looking for the wrong things. The past does not give up its secrets easily. It requires us to set aside what we think we know and look at the earth with fresh eyes. As we move forward, the focus shifts. We move from the scattered tools of the wilderness to the first signs of something even more organized. We look toward the high deserts of Peru, where the first true city of the Americas was waiting to be found. If you travel 200 miles north of Lima, Peru, you enter the Soup Valley. It is a harsh, arid landscape where the sun bleaches the earth. For a long time, this valley seemed like a wasteland of dirt mounds and rubble. Local farmers walked past these hills for generations without a second thought. But in the 1990s, an archaeologist named Ruth Shady began to look closer. She suspected that these mounds were not natural. As her team brushed away the dust of 5 millennia, a city began to emerge. This was Caral. It wasn't just a village or a small settlement. It was a massive, planned urban complex. The discovery of Caral sent a shockwave through history. Carbon dating of woven reed bags found in the foundations gave a date of 2600 BCE. To put that in perspective, Caral was a bustling metropolis at the same time the Great Pyramid of Giza was being built. It is the oldest known city in the Americas. In a time when we thought humans in this part of the world were still simple hunters, the people of Caral were master architects. They built 6 massive pyramids, circular plazas, and complex residential blocks. They did all of this without the wheel, without metal tools, and without a written language as we know it. As you walk through the ruins, a strange sense of confusion takes hold. Usually when we find an ancient city, we find walls, we find fortresses, barracks, and piles of weapons. We expect to see evidence of war because we are taught that civilization is born from conflict. But at Caral there are no weapons, there are no defensive battlements, there are no mutilated bodies or signs of fire and conquest. Instead of the tools of war, archaeologists found the tools of art. They discovered 32 flutes made of condor and pelican bones. They found 38 cornets made of deer and llama bones. It appears the heart of this city didn't beat to the sound of drums of war, but to the melody of music. This lack of warfare raises a profound doubt about our understanding of human nature. We have long believed that cities were built for protection. We assumed that leaders rose to power through force. Caral suggests a different path. It seems to have been a city built on trade and spirituality. The people here grew cotton and used it to make fishing nets. They traded these nets with the people on the coast for fish and shellfish. It was a society built on mutual need rather than mutual fear. But how did they maintain this peace for over 1,000 years? And how did they achieve such incredible feats of engineering? The pyramids of Caral are not just piles of stone, they are marvels of physics. The Soup Valley is an earthquake-prone region. To protect their temples, the builders used a clever technique. They filled woven reed bags called shikras with stones and placed them in the foundations. These bags acted as a flexible base. When the earth shook, the stones could move slightly, absorbing the energy and preventing the structures from collapsing. It is a seismic technology that modern engineers still study today. How did a primitive culture understand the mechanics of Earth movement so perfectly? As we dig deeper into the mystery, the sense of wonder grows. Corral was not just a place to live, it was a giant calendar. The buildings are aligned with the stars and the movement of the sun. In the circular plazas, the acoustics are so precise that a person speaking in the center can be heard by hundreds of people seated on the tiers. The city was a stage for ceremony. On the walls, researchers found symbols, spirals and geometric patterns that hint at a complex worldview. They had a system of knotted strings known as quipu, which later Andean cultures used for record keeping. Corral may have been where this system began. But even with all this evidence, a quiet realization begins to settle in. Corral feels less like a beginning and more like a peak. The level of organization and knowledge required to build this city doesn't usually appear overnight. It suggests that there were even earlier stages of development that we haven't found yet. And then there is the question of its end. Around 1800 BCE, the city was abandoned. The people walked away from their pyramids and their plazas. There are no signs of a massacre or a plague. It seems the climate shifted. Long droughts may have choked the valley with sand, making it impossible to farm. Corral challenges the idea that history is a straight line of constant progress. It shows us that a high level of civilization could exist, thrive in peace, and then simply vanish. We are left with the stones and the flutes. They remind us that the story of the Americas is not a short one. It is a deep, layered narrative of people who mastered the earth and looked to the stars. The silence of Corral is not an empty silence. It is the silence of a mystery waiting for us to listen. It forces us to wonder what other cities might still be sleeping under the sands, waiting for a shovel to wake them up. Deep in the humid swamplands of the Mexican Gulf Coast, the air is thick enough to breathe. The ground is often soft and treacherous. It is a place where the jungle works quickly to swallow anything that doesn't move. Yet, beneath this heavy canopy of green, researchers stumbled upon a discovery that defied everything they knew about the ancient world. It wasn't a golden treasure or a hidden tomb. It was a face, a massive, stone face staring out from the mud with an expression of calm, distant authority. This was our first real introduction to the Olmec. We call them the Rubber People, a name given by later cultures, but their true identity remains one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of the Americas. Within the first few moments of seeing these monuments, a central question arises that archaeology still struggles to answer. Who were these people, and why did they leave behind portraits that look so fundamentally different from the world around them? The Olmec do not have a written history we can easily read. They left no books and no grand lists of kings. Instead, they left the colossal heads. To date, 17 of these massive basalt sculptures have been found. They are not small ornaments. Most of them stand between 5 and 10 feet tall. They weigh on average 20 tons, though the largest exceeds 50 tons. That is roughly the weight of a modern battle tank. When you stand in front of one, you feel a strange sense of scale. The carving is precise. The lips are full, the noses are broad, and they wear helmets that look more like modern sports gear than ancient crown wear. As we follow the evidence, the logistics of these monuments become the first major hurdle. These heads are carved from basalt, a volcanic rock. But the sites where they were found, like San Lorenzo and La Venta, are located in coastal swamps. There is no basalt there. The nearest source of this stone is the Tuxtla Mountains. This range is over 60 miles away. In a world without the wheel, without horses, and without iron tools, moving a 50-ton boulder across 60 miles of tropical jungle and swamp seems impossible. Some researchers suggest the stones were moved on massive wooden sleds. Others believe they were floated on rafts down river systems during the flood season. But an anonymous voice from the field, perhaps a modern engineer looking at the terrain, might point out that the buoyancy required to float 50 tons of solid rock would require a raft the size of a small ship. The labour alone suggests a level of social organisation that we didn't think existed 3,000 years ago. This brings us to the most controversial thread of the mystery. For decades, people have looked at the features of the Olmec heads, the broad noses and the specific shape of the lips, and suggested they look remarkably like people from Africa. This has sparked a long-running debate about transoceanic contact. Could travellers from across the Atlantic have reached Mexico thousands of years before Columbus? It is a theory that makes mainstream historians very uncomfortable. They argue that these features are simply stylized versions of the local people. They point to the DNA of modern indigenous groups as the final word. Yet the doubt remains. Why would an entire civilization choose to depict its leaders with such a specific, recurring look if it didn't reflect their reality? One piece of evidence challenges the other, leaving us in a state of intellectual tension. Beyond the heads, the Olmec left behind a blueprint for all of Mesoamerica. They were the first to build pyramids in this part of the world. At the site of La Venta, a massive earthen mound rises over 100 feet into the air. It wasn't just a pile of dirt, it was a carefully aligned structure. Like many Olmec buildings, it points toward specific celestial events. They were watching the stars and tracking the movements of the sun long before the Maya. Inside these ceremonial centers, we find even more strange artifacts. There are small jade figurines with were-jaguar features, part human, part feline. These figures often have elongated heads and slanted eyes. They don't look like ordinary people, they look like something else entirely. The Olmec were also likely the first storytellers of the Americas to use symbols. In the late 1990s, a stone slab known as the Cascajal block was discovered. It is covered in 62 unique symbols. Some look like corn, others like insects or fish. If this is indeed a form of writing, it pushes the start of literacy in the New World back hundreds of years. But we cannot read it. It is a dead language, a coded message from a culture that seems to have appeared out of nowhere with all its skills already intact. This leads some to wonder if the Olmec were truly the mother culture, or if they were the final, refined echo of something even older, a civilization that has been completely erased by time. Their economy was just as complex as their art. We have found evidence of massive canal systems and storage facilities. They were masters of the swamp, turning a difficult environment into a productive landscape. They traded jade and obsidian across hundreds of miles, but then, as suddenly as they appeared, the Olmec centers began to fail. Around 400 BCE, the great city of La Venta was abandoned. But the people didn't just leave. They engaged in a strange final ritual. Many of the colossal heads were buried. Some were placed in neat rows deep underground. Others were intentionally defaced, their ears or noses chipped away before being covered by the earth. Why would a society go to such lengths to hide its most important monuments? Was it a way to protect the images of their ancestors from invaders? Or was it a ritual killing of the statues to release their spirit? Some suggest that a revolution occurred, and the people sought to erase the faces of their rulers. Others believe a natural disaster, like a change in the river's path, forced them to return their gods to the earth. There is no clear answer. We are left with a series of empty plazas and buried giants. The Olmec influence did not die with their cities. It lived on in the Maya, the Zapotec, and the Aztecs. The feathered serpent and the ritual ball games all started with the rubber people. They gave Mesoamerica its soul, its calendar, and its gods, but they kept their own story a secret. When we stand before those stone eyes today, we aren't just looking at art, we are looking at a challenge. The heads stare back with a look of knowing, as if they are aware of our confusion They remind us that history is often a game of fragments. We see the stone, but we miss the song. We find the city, but we lose the names of those who built it. As the sun sets over the ruins of San Lorenzo, the mystery remains alive. The jungle continues to grow. The mud continues to shift. Somewhere beneath the roots of the mahogany trees, there may be an 18th head or a 19th still waiting to be found. Each one we uncover adds a new sentence to the story, but the full book remains out of reach. We are left to wonder if we will ever truly know the faces of the first great civilization of the Americas, or if they will remain forever as silent witnesses to a past we are only beginning to understand. From these swampy foundations, the trail of civilization moves upward, leading us away from the coast and toward the high mountain plateaus. There, another mystery was beginning to take shape, a city of even greater scale, where the gods themselves were said to have walked. If the carvings of the Olmec feel like a distant dream, then Tiwanaku is the moment we wake up and realize the past was far more mechanical than we ever dared to imagine. Perched nearly 13,000 feet above sea level on the desolate altiplano of Bolivia, Tiwanaku is more than just a ruin. It is a puzzle made of red sandstone and grey andesite. At this altitude, the air is thin, the sun is punishing, and the landscape is unforgiving. Yet it was here that an ancient civilization chose to create a city that defies the standard laws of primitive construction. As you walk through the Kalasasaya temple, the sheer precision of the stonework stops you in your tracks. We are taught that these people used stone hammers and copper chisels, but the evidence on the ground suggests something else. Many of the blocks are fitted together with such tightness that you cannot slip a razor blade between them. This isn't just good craftsmanship, it is an obsession with geometry. The stones feature complex, interlocking joints, notches, grooves, and T-shapes that look as though they were pre-cast or machined. In a world before iron or steel, how do you cut andesite, a rock so hard it's often used in modern road construction with such surgical accuracy? The city itself functions as a massive, silent computer. The Kalasasaya platform is perfectly aligned with the cardinal directions. It serves as a solar calendar of incredible sophistication. During the equinoxes, the sun rises exactly through the center of the main gateway. On the solstices, the shadows cast by the stone pillars fall precisely on specific markers. This tells us that the builders weren't just moving rocks, they were mapping the heavens into the earth. They understood the tilt of the Earth's axis and the long-term cycles of the stars. This level of astronomical data doesn't happen by accident. It requires centuries of observation and a way to record that data across generations. But as we dig into the history of the site, a strange contradiction emerges. Mainstream archaeology dates Tiwanaku to around 500 CE. However, early researchers like Arthur Poznański noticed something odd about the astronomical alignments. He argued that the solar markers don't quite line up with where the sun rises today. Because of the slow wobble of the Earth, known as axial precession, the sun's position at the solstice shifts over thousands of years. Poznański calculated that for the temple to be perfectly aligned, it would have to be 15,000 years old. This would place Tiwanaku at the end of the last ice age, a time when, according to our textbooks, humans were still simple hunter-gatherers. There is also the mystery of the water. Tiwanaku sits several miles away from the current shores of Lake Titicaca. Yet, archaeologists have found ancient stone docks and structures that look like they were built for a busy port. There is evidence of water erosion on the stones and remains of shells that only exist in the lake. If Tiwanaku was once on the shoreline, the geography of the entire region must have changed dramatically since its construction. Either the lake has shrunk significantly, or the land itself has been uplifted by tectonic forces, processes that usually take much longer than the 1,500 years allowed by traditional timelines. Who were the hands behind the chisels? The Tiwanaku people who lived there in 500 CE were clearly skilled, but were they the original builders? Or were they, like the Inca who came after them, simply squatters in a city they didn't fully understand? It is a pattern we see across the globe. A new culture arrives at a site of incredible power, builds their own homes among the giant ruins, and adopts the old monuments as their own. The stones of Tiwanaku feel like an archive of a forgotten age, a record of a time when humanity understood the resonance of stone and the rhythm of the stars in a way we are only just beginning to rediscover. Deep in the Petén jungle of northern Guatemala, the canopy is so thick that the ground lives in a state of permanent twilight. For nearly 2,000 years, this wilderness held a secret that was not just hidden, but completely erased. We have long been fascinated by the famous Maya cities like Tikal or Palenque, but those were latecomers. Hidden beneath the roots and vines of the Mirador Basin lies a city that makes them look like small towns. This is El Mirador. It was the first great capital of the Maya world, yet it is a place that the Maya themselves seem to have forgotten. There are no legends about it, no folk songs mention its name. It wasn't found through ancient texts, but through the silent, massive shapes detected by satellite imagery and modern LiDAR scans. The scale of El Mirador is difficult to wrap your mind around. It flourished between 600 BCE and 100 CE. While the rest of the Americas were still in the early stages of village life, this was an empire of over 1 million people. They didn't just build a city, they terraformed the jungle. They constructed massive limestone causeways called sakbiob. These were raised stone highways, some stretching for miles, connecting the capital to a network of smaller urban centers. These roads were 30 feet wide and raised high above the swampy forest floor. They weren't just paths, they were the arteries of a sophisticated trade and military machine. At the heart of the city stands La Danta. It is not just a pyramid, it is a man-made mountain. In terms of total volume, it is one of the largest structures ever built in the ancient world. It surpasses the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its base covers an area the size of 35 football fields. To build it, the Maya had to quarry, transport, and stack millions of tons of limestone and mud. This level of engineering requires more than just muscle. It requires a massive bureaucracy, advanced geological knowledge, and a stable food supply to feed the thousands of workers. But as you look at these titanic ruins, a feeling of doubt begins to surface. How could an empire this large simply vanish from the cultural memory of its own people? Usually when a great city falls, its name echoes through the centuries in myths and stories. Yet when the later Maya built their cities, they acted as if El Mirador never existed. Some researchers suggest the city collapsed under its own ambition. To make the plaster that covered their pyramids, they had to burn lime. This required an enormous amount of wood. They may have deforested the entire basin to keep their city shining white. Without the trees, the soil washed away, the reservoirs dried up. The green paradise became a desert of dust and stone. The wonder of El Mirador lies in what it left behind for the future. Even though the city was abandoned, its blueprint remained. The gods they carved into the stone, the feathered serpents, the twin heroes, the jaguar deities, all reappeared in the later Maya sites. It suggests that while the city died, its ideas survived like an ember passed from hand to hand in the dark. It was at El Mirador that the Maya first mastered the art of being a civilization. They learned how to organize 1 million people, how to map the stars, and how to record their thoughts in stone. This city was the laboratory where the Maya soul was born. As we leave the shadows of the Petén, we realize that El Mirador wasn't just a lost city. It was a warning. It shows us what happens when a society pushes the earth too hard, but it also shows us that even when a city is forgotten, its voice still whispers through the generations that follow. It leads us toward the most complex achievement of the Maya. Not their stone mountains, but their mastery of time itself. In the quiet halls of ancient Maya temples, you can find something more valuable than gold or jade. It is carved into the doorframes and painted onto the walls. It is a language made of symbols that look like faces, animals, and abstract knots. For centuries, these glyphs were a total mystery to the modern world. We saw them as pretty decorations or strange art. But once we began to crack the code, we realized we weren't just looking at writing. We were looking at a map of the universe. The Maya were obsessed with time, and they developed a system to track it that remains one of the most accurate in human history. The Maya didn't just have one calendar, they had three that worked together like the gears of a complex watch. There was the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ritual cycle. There was the Hab, a 365-day solar year. And then there was the long count, a linear tally of days that stretched back thousands of years to a mythical creation date. The precision is staggering. Their solar calendar is accurate to within 0.002 days of the actual year. This is more precise than the Gregorian calendar we use today. They tracked the cycles of Venus, the timing of eclipses, and the movements of Mars with a detail that modern astronomers only achieved with telescopes and computers. But a central question continues to haunt the study of Maya literacy. Where did this system come from? It doesn't seem to have a clumsy childhood. When it appears in the archaeological record, it is already fully developed. It is a complete script capable of expressing every sound and concept in the Maya language. Some researchers look toward the older Olmec sites for an answer. In the 1990s, the Cascajal block was found in Veracruz. It dates back to 900 BCE and features symbols that look like a prototype for the Maya script. If the Olmec were the ones who first tamed time and language, it means the history of writing in the Americas is at least 1,000 years older than we thought. This creates a contradictory thread in our understanding of history. We are taught that writing evolves slowly, from simple pictures to complex symbols, but the Maya script is a sophisticated blend of both. A single glyph can represent a sound, a word, or a deep metaphysical idea. For every theory that says the Maya invented this themselves, there is a rational counter-argument suggesting they were the brilliant students of an even older, lost teacher. Perhaps the knowledge was compiled at places like El Mirador and then refined over centuries into the codes we see today. The Maya codices, the few books that survived the fires of the Spanish conquest, show that time was not linear to them. It didn't just move forward, it moved in circles. To the Maya, the past was a mirror for the future. If a certain celestial alignment brought peace or famine 1,000 years ago, they believed it would do the same when the cycle returned. This wasn't superstition, it was a form of cosmic science. They recorded time not just to count days, but to stay in sync with the pulse of the universe. They believed that if they stopped keeping track, the world might simply cease to exist. When you look at a Maya glyph, you are looking at the fingerprints of a mind that saw the world as a single, breathing machine. They didn't see themselves as separate from the stars or the jungle. Everything was connected by the rhythm of the days. Their temples weren't just buildings, they were instruments built to capture the sun and the moon at the exact moment a cycle ended. They were timekeepers of a sacred order. As we finish decoding their symbols, we find that the Maya were not just documenting their kings and their wars. They were trying to preserve a memory of the cosmos. They knew that empires would fall and jungles would grow over their cities, but they believed that time itself was eternal. Their writing was a way to anchor themselves to that eternity. The mystery of the Maya isn't just in how they built their pyramids, but in how they managed to capture the invisible movement of the stars and turn it into a language that we can still read today. For the Maya, the world was a layered reality. We walk on the skin of the earth, the middle world, but beneath our feet lies a realm of shadow, water, and spirit known as Xibalba. For decades, we looked at the great Maya pyramids as solid monuments, stone mountains built to reach the heavens. But as we peer beneath the surface with modern eyes, a new story is emerging. We are discovering that these structures weren't just built on the land, they were built into it. Beneath the Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque and the towering El Castillo at Chichen Itza, there is a hidden geography of tunnels, caves, and water-filled chambers. These weren't accidents of nature that the Maya happened to find. They were the very reason the pyramids were built where they stand. The evidence trail begins with ground-penetrating radar. In the last few years, researchers at Chichen Itza made a startling discovery. Directly beneath the main pyramid, buried under layers of limestone, lies a massive cenote, a natural sinkhole filled with water. The pyramid sits exactly at the convergence point of 4 of these sacred wells. It is a cosmic anchor. This wasn't a coincidence of engineering. The Maya architects intentionally centered the weight of their civilization over this watery void. It was their axis mundi, the central pillar connecting the sky, the earth, and the depths of the underworld. In the ruins of Palenque, the mystery takes a more personal turn. When the tomb of King Pakal was first opened in 1952, it changed everything we knew about Maya royalty. But it's what lay under the sarcophagus that whispers of a hidden journey. Archaeologists found a small, stone-carved conduit, a spirit hole, that leads from the tomb down into a complex system of underground water tunnels. According to Maya belief, the dead didn't just stay in the ground, their souls had to navigate a treacherous subterranean river to reach rebirth. Pakal's tomb wasn't just a final resting place, it was a launching pad into the deep. This brings us to a contradictory thread. If you look at the famous lid of Pakal's sarcophagus, you see the king in a strange reclined position. To some, he looks like he is piloting a machine, surrounded by flames and celestial symbols. While mainstream scholars see this as a purely spiritual metaphor for the world tree, a more curious mind might wonder if the Maya were trying to describe a physical process we don't yet understand. Were these tunnels meant for more than just the dead? Indigenous traditions suggest that these passageways were knowledge vaults, places where priests and initiates would retreat into total darkness to commune with ancestors. The environment of these tunnels mirrors the uncertainty of the journey. They are damp, silent, and perfectly carved. In some areas, the acoustics are so precise that a whisper at one end can be heard clearly at the other. This wasn't a haphazard maze, it was a sensory laboratory. By controlling light, sound, and water flow, the Maya created a space where the veil between worlds grew thin. They built within the spirit, creating architecture that wasn't meant for the eyes of the public, but for the ears of the gods. As we uncover these sealed doors and buried stairs, we have to ask, what were they so careful to hide? And are there stories still waiting in the dark that were never meant to see the sun? If the tunnels are the veins of the Maya world, then the cenotes are its eyes. Across the Yucatan Peninsula, the earth is like a giant block of Swiss cheese, riddled with thousands of these circular, water-filled sinkholes. To a modern traveller, They are beautiful swimming holes. To the ancient Maya, they were something much more profound. They were portals. A cenote was a place where the surface of the water acted as a mirror, reflecting the sky and creating an illusion that the heavens were actually inside the earth. To enter the water was to step through a door into Xibalba. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza is perhaps the most famous of these gateways. It is a sheer drop of 60 feet to the water's surface, a dark green pool that holds the secrets of centuries. When divers first explored its depths, they didn't just find mud, they found a treasury of the soul. They recovered gold bells, intricately carved jade, and obsidian knives. But they also found bones, the remains of men, women, and many children. For a long time, we viewed this through a lens of horror, calling it human sacrifice. But a gentler, more reflective view suggests these were offerings. In a land with no major rivers, the cenotes were the only source of life-giving water. These gifts weren't given in malice, they were given to keep the universe in balance, a desperate conversation with the gods of rain and fertility. There is a technical mystery to these pools as well. Many cenotes are connected by a massive underground river system, one of the largest on the planet. The Maya seem to have an intuitive map of this hidden network. They built shrines in the deepest parts of these caves, places where no natural light ever reaches. At the Holtun cenote, researchers found underwater stone platforms and carved columns. Why go to such lengths to build in a place that is submerged and pitch black? It suggests a level of dedication that goes beyond simple ritual. They were anchoring their physical world to the spiritual plumbing of the earth. An internal counter-argument often arises here. Perhaps these sites were simply practical shelters or water storage systems, but that doesn't explain the acoustics. When you stand at the edge of certain cenotes and speak, the sound doesn't just bounce back, it spirals downward with a strange, delayed reverb. It creates a three-dimensional soundscape that feels alive. It's possible the Maya chose these locations because the earth itself spoke back to them. They were sensitive to the resonance of the stone and the vibration of the water in a way that modern science is only just beginning to measure. Today, the descendants of the Maya still come to the water's edge. They light copal incense and scatter marigold petals into the still pools. They don't need a sonar map to know that the cenote is sacred. They understand that some truths aren't meant to be measured, they are meant to be felt. The cenotes remain as they have always been, silent, watchful portals. They remind us that the Maya world didn't end at the horizon. It went down into the dark, into the water, and into the very memory of the earth itself. If we listen closely to the echo of the water against the limestone, we might just hear the answer to a question we haven't yet learned how to ask. From the mirrored waters of the Maya cenotes, our journey pulls us north, away from the humid jungles, and into the high, thin air of central Mexico. Here, in a vast mountain basin, we encounter a site that seems to exist on a scale for giants. This is Teotihuacan. For the Aztecs who discovered it in the 14th century, the city was so overwhelming that they believed no mere mortal could have built it. They called it the place where humans become gods. But the name itself reveals the first great mystery. The Aztecs didn't build it. By the time they arrived, the city had been a silent ghost for over 7 centuries. We are faced with a profound historical vacuum. There are no written records, no names of kings, and no oral histories that survived the city's collapse. We don't even know what the original inhabitants called themselves. What we do have is a meticulously planned urban grid covering nearly 8 square miles. At its peak, around 250 CE, Teotihuacan was home to an estimated 125,000 to 200,000 people. This made it one of the largest cities in the world, larger than contemporary Rome or Alexandria, yet it functioned without any known writing system or defensive walls. The city's spine is the Avenue of the Dead, a massive boulevard stretching over 2 miles. Along this axis sit the heavyweights of ancient architecture: the Pyramid of the Moon, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, and the Pyramid of the Sun. The Pyramid of the Sun is a behemoth built from roughly 1.1 million cubic meters of stone and earth, all moved without the wheel or draft animals. Its base is nearly identical in size to the Great Pyramid of Giza, but its alignment is what truly puzzles researchers. The entire city is tilted 15.5 degrees east of true north. This isn't an error, it's a deliberate choice that aligns the city with the setting sun on key dates, such as the passage of the sun through the zenith. A contradictory thread emerges when we look at the structural layout. Some researchers have pointed out that the spacing and positioning of the 3 main pyramids closely mirror the stars in Orion's belt. This celestial mirroring is a recurring theme in ancient sites across the globe, from Egypt to the Andes. Was Teotihuacan designed as a cosmic machine? Unlike the later Aztec or Maya cities, which often grew organically, Teotihuacan was built according to a master plan from its very inception. This suggests a powerful, centralized authority, perhaps a caste of priest-engineers who possessed a deep understanding of mathematics and astronomy. But who were they? Some suggest they were the Totonac, others point to refugees from volcanic eruptions in the south, yet, without a single name etched in stone, the builders remain anonymous. The city offers no portraits of its rulers, no statues of its generals. It is as if individual identity was surrendered to a collective cosmic order. The city doesn't tell a story of human ego, it stands as a monument to the universe itself. As we walk the Avenue of the Dead, the silence of the stones feels less like an absence of information and more like a secret being kept. To find the heart of that secret, we have to look underground, where the Aztecs never could. Beneath the weathered stones of Teotihuacan lies a hidden world that ground-penetrating radar is only just beginning to map. If the pyramids were designed to reach the sky, then the tunnels below were crafted to touch the womb of the earth. These aren't natural caves, they are man-made arteries, intentionally sealed and forgotten by the very people who carved them. For centuries, they remained a myth, until a heavy rain in 2003 opened a sinkhole near the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, revealing a doorway that had been closed for nearly 2,000 years. The discovery of the Tlalocan Tunnel changed everything. Stretching over 330 feet directly beneath the pyramid, the passage was found to be packed with deliberate layers of soil and stone, as if the inhabitants wanted to lock something inside, or keep the world out. As archaeologists painstakingly cleared the debris over 6 years, they found a scene that looked more like alchemy than archaeology. The walls and ceiling of the tunnel were coated with a shimmering powder made of pyrite, fool's gold, and mica. When illuminated by torchlight, the entire tunnel would have sparkled like the night sky, turning a walk through the earth into a journey through the stars. The artifacts found within were equally surreal. Thousands of metallic spheres coated in yellow jarosite lay scattered on the floor. Their purpose remains a mystery, but they weren't the only strange find. In the deepest chambers, researchers discovered pools of liquid mercury. In the ancient world, mercury was incredibly rare and toxic, often symbolizing the flow of life or spirit. Some speculate these pools were meant to represent subterranean lakes or rivers in a miniature model of the underworld. This brings us to a radical internal counter-argument. Conventional archaeology sees these as ritual spaces for burial or offerings. However, a more investigative lens asks if these chambers served a physiological purpose. With their absolute silence, stable temperatures and echoing acoustics, these tunnels may have functioned as consciousness chambers. In total darkness, the human brain begins to produce its own imagery. A priest or initiate, surrounded by shimmering pyrite and the heavy scent of mercury, might have entered a trance state to speak with the gods. The tunnels underneath the Pyramid of the Sun suggest a similar intent. A natural cave system was modified into a four-lobed chamber, resembling a clover or a womb. This womb of the earth was likely the city's most sacred spot, the place where the first humans were believed to have emerged into the world. It reveals a civilization that was as focused on the inner landscape of the mind as they were on the outer landscape of the stars. When you emerge from the damp, silent chill of these tunnels back into the blinding Mexican sun, the city looks different. You realize that the builders of Teotihuacan weren't just moving rocks, they were engineers of the human experience. They understood how to use light, shadow, and stone to trigger awe. They didn't leave behind their names because perhaps in their worldview, the individual didn't matter, only the alignment mattered, the harmony between the soul, the city, and the cosmos. When we think of ancient empires, our minds usually drift to the stone temples of the Maya or the desert pyramids of Egypt. We rarely look at the rolling plains of the American Midwest. But tucked away in the river valleys of Illinois, the earth holds a secret that challenges everything we were taught about North American history. Long before the first European explorers arrived, a massive urban center rose out of the silt of the Mississippi River. This was Cahokia. At its peak in the 12th century, it was home to tens of thousands of people. It was a city larger than London was at the same time. Yet, when the first French travelers finally saw the site, the city was empty. Only massive, silent earthen hills remained. We are left with a mystery that feels almost impossible. How did the largest city north of Mexico vanish without leaving a single written record or oral legend? The evidence of Cahokia's greatness is written in the dirt. Spread across 6 square miles, the city featured over 120 earthen mounds. These were not natural hills. They were carefully engineered structures. The most dominant of these is Monk's Mound. It rises 100 feet into the air. Its base covers more than 14 acres. That is larger than the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Imagine the labor required to build this. Thousands of people carried individual basketfuls of earth one by one for decades. They weren't just piling dirt. They were creating a tiered ceremonial stage for a ruling elite. This suggests a highly organized society with a clear hierarchy. As we walk through the central plaza, we find traces of a sophisticated understanding of the cosmos. To the west of Monk's Mound, archaeologists found a series of large post holes. They realized these holes formed a giant circle. They called it Woodhenge. Much like Stonehenge in England, these cedar posts were aligned with the rising sun. During the summer and winter solstices, the sun rises in perfect alignment with specific posts. This tells us the Cahokians were not just farmers, they were astronomers. They used the sky to manage their agricultural cycles and their sacred rituals. They were people who lived in sync with the rhythm of the stars. The mystery deepens when we look at the artifacts left behind. We find obsidian from the volcanic peaks of the Rocky Mountains. We find copper from the cold shores of Lake Superior. There are seashells from the Gulf of Mexico and mica from the Appalachian Mountains. This wasn't an isolated village. Cahokia was the heart of a continental trade network. It was a hub where ideas, goods, and people from all over North America converged. Some researchers argue that Cahokia was the center of a Mississippian empire that influenced cultures thousands of miles away. But if they were so successful, why did they disappear? This is where the evidence trail takes a confusing turn. By 1350 CE, the city was a ghost town. Unlike the ruins of war-torn cities, there are no signs of a great fire. There are no mass graves showing evidence of a violent siege. The city didn't fall to an invader, it simply faded away. Some skeptics argue that the environment simply couldn't handle the population. They point to evidence of massive deforestation and the siltation of the local creeks. Perhaps they cut down too many trees for their wood henges and their homes. Without the trees, the floods became unmanageable, the crops failed. The Golden Age became a struggle for survival. Others suggest a more spiritual collapse. If the ruling priests promised that their rituals would keep the sun rising and the rain falling, a single long-term drought would have shattered their authority. When the gods stop listening, the people stop following. They may have simply packed their bags and walked away in small groups, merging into other tribes. This would explain why no single modern tribe claims Cahokia as their exclusive home. They are all, in a sense, the descendants of a broken dream. Cahokia remains a silent witness to a time when North America had its own imperial heart. It reminds us that history isn't just about who arrived last. It's about the civilizations that were already here, listening to the stars long before we knew their names. If Cahokia was a monument to urban power, then the effigy mounds are a monument to the spirit. Scattered across the green hills of Iowa, Wisconsin, and Ohio, thousands of earthen shapes crawl across the landscape. From the ground, they look like nothing more than gentle swells in the grass, but if you could look down from the clouds, a different world reveals itself. You would see giant birds with wingspans of 300 feet. You would see bears, panthers, and turtles. You would see the great serpent. These are the effigy mounds, and they pose a question that touches on the very nature of human perception. Why did ancient people build massive designs that could only be fully understood from the sky? The most famous of these is the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. It is a staggering 1,300 feet long. It depicts a snake coiling across a plateau, its jaws open as if to swallow an egg. The engineering is precise. The curves of the snake's body are not random. They align with the solstices and the equinoxes. Some researchers even believe the mound mirrors the constellation of Draco. Others suggest it was built to record the appearance of Halley's Comet in 1066. This wasn't just a dirt pile, it was a cosmic map. It was a way to anchor the movements of the heavens to the skin of the earth. But the mystery of the effigy mounds is often found in what they are not. For a long time, we assumed all mounds were burials. We thought they were just fancy tombs for tribal leaders. But when archaeologists began to study the animal-shaped mounds in the upper Midwest, they found something surprising. Many of them are empty, they contain no bodies and no grave goods. This challenges our rational view of monuments. If they weren't tombs, what were they? An internal counter-argument suggests they were territorial markers. Perhaps a bear mound told other tribes they were entering the land of the Bear Clan. However, many indigenous thinkers offer a more reflective explanation. They see the mounds as prayers in the soil. They believe the shapes were meant to communicate with the spirits of the earth and the sky. The animals chosen weren't just local wildlife. They represented different layers of the cosmos. Birds belong to the upper world. Panthers and bears belong to the earth. Serpents belong to the underworld. By shaping the earth into these forms, the builders were trying to maintain a balance between these different worlds. They were creating a living landscape where the physical and the spiritual were one and the same. The logistics of these mounds are equally impressive. They were built by people of the woodland period between 500 and 1200 CE. They had no metal tools and no surveyed maps. Yet they managed to maintain the proportions of these massive animals across uneven terrain. How did they ensure the bird's wings were symmetrical? How did they know the snake's head was pointing exactly toward the sunset on the longest day of the year? It suggests a level of spatial awareness and community cooperation that we often fail to credit to primitive cultures. They worked in layers, using different colors of clay and soil. to give the mounds a hidden internal structure. Tragically, we have lost more of this story than we have saved. During the 19th and 20th centuries, thousands of these mounds were ploughed under by farmers who saw them as obstacles to progress. They were levelled for roads and shopping malls. With every mound destroyed, a page of North American history was torn out and burned. We are left with fragments. The mounds that remain are like letters from a lost alphabet. They remind us that the people who lived here before us were not just wandering hunters. They were listeners. They were artists who used the very earth as their canvas. When you stand next to a 1,000-year-old earthen bear, the air feels different. You realize that you are standing on a message. The builders didn't need to write their names in a book. They wrote their beliefs into the hills. They knew that the grass would grow and the seasons would change, but the shape of the spirit would remain. The effigy mounds are a silent reminder that the land we walk on has a memory. If we are quiet enough and if we are willing to look at the world from a different perspective, we might just begin to understand what they were trying to tell us. From the earthen symbols stretching across the eastern plains, our journey pulls us west into the cracked, red heart of the American Southwest. This is a landscape of extremes, of searing heat, sudden flash floods and canyon walls that seem to glow with an inner fire. Here, tucked into the sheer cliffs of the Four Corners region, we find the remains of a civilization that achieved the impossible. For centuries, the people we once called the Anasazi, now more accurately known as the ancestral Puebloans, built a thriving society in a land that should have been uninhabitable. They were architects of stone, masters of water, and astronomers of the high desert. But in the late 13th century, they did something that continues to haunt the historical record. They simply walked away. The evidence of their presence is carved directly into the rock. At Mesa Verde, you can see their dwellings nestled into massive sandstone alcoves. These weren't just primitive shelters, they were sophisticated apartment complexes. Using hand-shaped sandstone blocks and a mortar made of mud and ash, they built multi-story towers and hundreds of interconnected rooms. There is a profound sense of intention in these sites. They didn't just build where it was easy, they built where the sun's warmth would hit the stone in the winter and where the overhanging cliffs would provide shade in the summer. It was a masterpiece of passive solar design created hundreds of years before the term existed. As we look at the logistics of their survival, a sense of wonder takes over. There are no permanent rivers in these high deserts. To survive, the ancestral Puebloans became the world's most patient hydrologists. They built intricate systems of check dams, reservoirs, and terrace farms to catch every drop of seasonal rain. They grew the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, in soil that looks like dust. This wasn't just endurance, it was a deep, spiritual collaboration with the environment. Beneath the center of their plazas, they dug circular underground chambers called kivas. These were the hearts of their communities, sacred spaces for storytelling, ritual, and the passing of generational knowledge. But then, around the year 1270, the silence began. One by one, the great cliff dwellings were abandoned. The fires in the kivas went out. There are no signs of a massive war or a sudden plague. In many rooms, archaeologists found pottery left exactly where it sat, as if the owners intended to return the next day. A common theory points to the Great Drought, a 24-year period of almost no rainfall that struck the region. Without water, the social contract likely crumbled. The elders' prayers for rain were no longer answered, and the people lost faith in the old centers of power. There is, however, a more reflective perspective offered by their modern descendants, the Hopi, Zuni, and Rio Grande Pueblo peoples. They don't use the word disappearance. To them, this was a migration. They believe their ancestors didn't fail, they simply completed a cycle. They reached a point where the land needed to rest, and their spiritual journey required them to move toward new horizons. The old cities weren't abandoned in shame. They were left as footprints, living memories of a time when humanity lived in perfect, if difficult, harmony with the desert. When you stand in the shadow of a Mesa Verde cliff today, you don't feel like you are looking at a tomb. You feel like you are looking at an exhaled breath, waiting for the wind to carry it to the next canyon. If Mesa Verde was about the art of living, then Chaco Canyon was about the science of the soul. Located in a remote, sun-bleached corner of New Mexico, Chaco is not an easy place to reach, and that was likely by design. This was the ceremonial and intellectual hub of the ancestral Puebloan world. It is home to the great houses, massive, D-shaped stone complexes that represent the pinnacle of prehistoric architecture in North America. But as we study the ruins of Pueblo Bonito, we realize that these weren't just buildings. They were a massive, three-dimensional library of astronomical data. The precision at Chaco is unnerving. The walls of these great houses are perfectly aligned with the cardinal directions. But more impressively, they track the movements of the sun and moon with terrifying accuracy. At a site high on Fajada Butte, researchers discovered the sun dagger. It consists of 3 large stone slabs leaning against a cliff face, framing a spiral petroglyph. At the exact moment of the summer solstice, a dagger of light pierces the center of the spiral. During the equinoxes, the light frames the spiral's edges. This wasn't a lucky guess. It was a deliberate, calibrated instrument that allowed the Chacoans to tell time on a cosmic scale. This brings us to one of the most complex threads in ancient American history. Chaco Canyon doesn't just track the sun, it tracks the moon. Some of the architecture at the site is aligned with the major lunar standstill, a subtle cycle of the moon's rising and setting that takes 18.6 years to complete. To map this, a culture must observe the sky and record its data for decades, if not centuries. This suggests that the Chacoans weren't just sky watchers, they were master mathematicians. They were encoding the rhythm of the universe into the very foundations of their homes. A contradictory thread often surfaces regarding the purpose of the Chacoan roads. Stretching out from the canyon are hundreds of miles of perfectly straight roads, some 30 feet wide. They don't curve to follow the terrain, they go straight up cliffs and across mesas. For a people without the wheel or draft animals, these weren't practical trade routes. They were symbolic axes. Some researchers believe they were built to connect Chaco to sacred landmarks or outlier communities. Others suggest they were spirit roads intended for ceremonial processions that link the earth to the sky. They are the physical manifestations of a worldview where geography and geometry are sacred. Despite the grandeur of these great houses, there is very little evidence that many people actually lived in them full-time. There are few hearths and very little trash. This leads us to a fascinating realization. Chaco Canyon was a vacant city. It was a pilgrimage site, a place where people from across the Southwest gathered at specific times of the year to witness the sun hit the markers and to participate in massive, coordinated rituals. It was a place of high-level knowledge, a desert university where the secrets of the stars were kept. When the Chacoans eventually left in the 12th century, they didn't just walk away, they sealed many of the rooms and sometimes set fire to the roofs in a final transformative ritual. They were closing the book. Today, Chaco stands as a humbling reminder of what we have lost. We have all the telescopes and computers in the world, yet we have lost the ability to read the sky with our own eyes. Chaco Canyon isn't a ruin, it's a mirror. It asks us if we are still in rhythm with the universe, or if we have become so loud that we can no longer hear the whispers of the sun and the moon. As we leave the dry silence of the desert, we head south into a world of green shadows and relentless humidity. Here, in the depths of the Amazon basin, the air is alive with the hum of insects and the drip of moisture from the canopy. For centuries, this forest has guarded a secret that drove men to madness and death. It began with a whisper of gold, a city so wealthy that its streets were paved with the sun. We call it El Dorado. But as we peel back the layers of myth, we find that the real mystery isn't about gold at all. It is about a civilization so well integrated with the earth that we couldn't even see it when we were standing right on top of it. The legend didn't start with a city, it started with a man. Among the Muisca people of the Colombian highlands, a new leader was initiated in a ceremony at Lake Guatavita. He would be covered in sticky resin and then dusted with fine gold powder until he shone like a living statue. He was paddled to the center of the lake, where he would dive into the emerald waters, offering gold and emeralds to the spirits below. When the Spanish heard of this gilded one, El Dorado, the story began to grow. Through a game of historical telephone, the man became a city, and the city became an empire. The evidence trail of the 16th century is a ledger of tragedy. Thousands of explorers, from Spanish conquistadors to English privateers like Sir Walter Raleigh, vanished into the green labyrinth searching for the Lake of Gold. They looked for stone towers and European-style fortresses, and when they found only jungle, they assumed the stories were lies. This skepticism hardened into a scientific consensus that lasted for centuries. The Amazon was a counterfeit paradise, a wild place where the soil was too poor to support anything more than small, nomadic tribes. But in the early 20th century, a British explorer named Percy Fawcett began to question this narrative. He didn't care about gold. He was looking for Z, a lost city of advanced architecture that he believed lay hidden in the Mato Grosso region of Brazil. Fawcett was a man of cold logic and strange intuitions, convinced that the savages the world looked down upon were the descendants of a much higher civilization. In 1925, Fawcett, his son, and a companion walked into the forest and never returned. For decades, his disappearance was just another cautionary tale about the jungle's hunger. However, a contradictory thread has emerged in the last decade, and it has completely shattered our understanding of the Amazon. Using LiDAR, light detection sensors that can see through the thickest foliage, archaeologists have discovered that the Amazon isn't a pristine wilderness. It is an engineered landscape. Beneath the trees, LiDAR has revealed a massive network of geometric earthworks, circular plazas, perfectly straight roads, and sprawling urban centers connected by miles of causeways. These aren't the stone ruins of the Maya. They are garden cities made of earth and wood, designed to thrive within the forest rather than against it. The most stunning piece of evidence is the soil itself. Throughout the Amazon, researchers have found patches of terra preta, or dark earth. This is not natural soil. It is a man-made, nutrient-rich compost created thousands of years ago by mixing charcoal, bone, and organic waste. While the surrounding jungle soil is acidic and yellow, terra preta is black, fertile, and teeming with microbial life that actually regenerates itself. This liquid gold allowed ancient Amazonians to support millions of people in a place where modern farming often fails. These people weren't just living in the jungle, they were the jungle's architects. This leads to a reflective realization. The conquistadors were standing in the middle of a massive, sophisticated civilization, but because they didn't see stone walls or gold coins, they couldn't recognize it. They were blinded by their own definition of civilization. The real El Dorado was a masterpiece of ecological engineering. It was a society that mastered the art of sustainability, creating a world where the boundary between human city and natural forest simply didn't exist. Why did it vanish? The answer is likely as tragic as it is simple. Long before the explorers pushed deep into the interior, European diseases like smallpox and measles had already travelled up the river systems. The cities of the Amazon were likely emptied by plague within a generation. Without humans to maintain the terra preta and the roads, the jungle, patient and fast, reclaimed the land. The forest didn't swallow a mystery, it swallowed a tragedy. Today, as we look at the LIDAR scans, we are forced to admit that the primitive Amazon we thought we knew was a myth of our own making. The forest is not a void, it is a memory. El Dorado was never a hoard of gold waiting to be stolen. It was a way of living that we are only now, centuries later, beginning to understand. As we look deeper into these lost landscapes, we realize that the greatest discoveries aren't the ones we find with a shovel, but the ones that force us to change our minds. For centuries, we have looked at the Amazon and seen a wall of green, a green hell to some, a pristine paradise to others. But both versions of that story are wrong. We are now realizing that the Amazon is not a wilderness, it is a sprawling, abandoned archive. The falling leaves and decomposing branches haven't just been making soil, they have been burying a memory. Now the maps of our history are being redrawn by a technology that can see through the trees. LIDAR has become our time machine, and what it is revealing is a truth that is as stunning as it is uncomfortable. The Amazon was once home to an urban civilization as complex and populated as the Roman Empire, and we nearly missed it entirely. The evidence trail provided by LIDAR has exposed over 450 massive geometric earthworks in the upper Amazon basin. From the air, the forest floor looks like a circuit board. There are perfect circles, squares, and octagons, some spanning hundreds of meters. These aren't just holes in the ground, they are the foundations of a society that understood geometry and cosmology on a grand scale. They are connected by a network of perfectly straight roads and carved canals that defy the natural chaos of the jungle. This isn't the work of small, nomadic groups. This required thousands of laborers, a centralized plan, and a vision of the world that merged human life with the celestial grid. In the Llanos de Mojos region of Bolivia, the mystery takes a turn toward genius. Here, the land is a patchwork of seasonal swamps. To any modern farmer, it is a nightmare. But the ancient Amazonians saw it as a canvas. They created a system of thousands of raised fields, long oval mounds that kept crops above the floodwaters. These were linked by an intricate web of canals and levees that managed water flow with the precision of a Swiss watch. We call it floating agriculture, but it was more than that. It was advanced ecological engineering. They didn't clear the forest to plant crops. They planted a food forest that provided everything they needed while actually increasing the biodiversity of the region. The secret to this success was the soil. Throughout the basin, researchers have identified patches of terra preta, or dark earth. This is an anthropogenic soil, a deliberate creation of charcoal, organic waste, and microorganisms. It is so nutrient-rich that it remains fertile hundreds of years after it was last tended. Even more amazing, it has a living quality. It seems to regenerate itself over time. Modern science has yet to fully replicate this ancient recipe. This soil wasn't just dirt, it was the battery that powered a civilization of millions, allowing for permanent, dense settlements in a place where the natural soil is practically sterile. A contradictory thread often arises. Why did these people build with earth instead of stone? To the European eye, stone means civilization and dirt means primitive. But in the Amazon, stone is rare. The genius of these people was their adaptability. At sites like Cuhikugu, near the headwaters of the Xingu River, archaeologists have mapped a galactic urban layout. There were central plazas, defensive moats, and roads that linked dozens of satellite villages into a single, cohesive political unit. They built a world out of what they had: soil, water, and trees. They created an engineered wilderness that functioned so perfectly that later explorers couldn't distinguish the man-made groves from the natural forest. The silence of the Amazon today is a product of tragedy, not a lack of history. When the first Europeans arrived in the 16th century, they brought invisible invaders, smallpox, measles, and influenza. Because the Amazon was so well connected by its rivers and roads, the plagues travelled faster than the explorers themselves. It is estimated that 90% of the population died within a few generations. When the later explorers arrived, they didn't find cities. They found a few scattered, traumatized survivors and a jungle that was aggressively reclaiming its own. The lost cities didn't fail from within. They were decapitated by a biological catastrophe. Today, as bulldozers clear the forest for cattle ranches, these ruins are being exposed and destroyed before we can even name them. We are in a race against time. Every acre of forest lost is a page of this archive burned. The real mystery of the Amazon isn't whether there was gold, but how a civilization managed to support millions of people for thousands of years without destroying their environment. They left us a blueprint for a future we are currently struggling to imagine, a world where humanity and nature aren't at war, but are two parts of the same thriving machine. As we leave the engineered forests of the Amazon, the terrain shifts violently. We trade the suffocating green for the absolute sun-bleached silence of the high Peruvian desert. Here, on a desolate plateau between the Andes and the Pacific, the earth itself has been turned into a canvas. For over 1,000 years, the Nazca people etched a series of impossible designs into the red-brown gravel of the Pampa. From the ground, they look like nothing more than dusty paths or random clearings, but from the sky, they transform into a sprawling gallery of geometric shapes and giant animal figures. It is a sight that defies logic. Why would a civilization spend centuries creating a masterpiece that they themselves could never truly see? The evidence trail of the Nazca lines is a study in simplicity and scale. These geoglyphs weren't built with stone or mortar. Instead, the Nazca used a subtractive method. They simply moved the dark, iron oxide-coated pebbles that cover the desert surface to reveal the lighter, sandy soil underneath. Because the region is one of the driest on Earth and experiences almost no wind at ground level, these shallow grooves have remained undisturbed for nearly 2 millennia. The figures are staggering in their variety: a spider with a leg extended, a monkey with a spiraling tail, a hummingbird frozen in mid-flight, and a mysterious humanoid figure often called the astronaut. The central mystery, of course, is the perspective. Some of these lines stretch for miles, straight as a laser, ignoring the contour of hills and valleys. The animal figures are so large, some spanning hundreds of feet, that their proportions can only be appreciated from an altitude of at least 1,000 feet. This has led to a flurry of contradictory threads. In the mid-20th century, the theory of ancient astronauts gained massive popularity, suggesting the lines were runways for extraterrestrial craft. While this captures the imagination, a more skeptical, grounded view asks a simpler question. If the Nazca couldn't fly, did they have a way to see from above? Some researchers have experimented with primitive hot air balloons made of local textiles, proving it was technologically possible, even if no physical evidence of such balloons remains. However, the more we study the lines, the more we realize they might not be about looking down, but about looking along. German mathematician Maria Reicher dedicated her life to the desert, meticulously sweeping the lines to reveal their secrets. She believed they were a giant astronomical calendar with lines pointing toward the rising and setting points of the sun, moon, and stars. For a society dependent on agriculture in a desert, Knowing exactly when to plant was a matter of life and death. But even this doesn't explain everything. Recent archaeological work suggests the lines were ceremonial pathways. Excavations have found broken pottery and seashells at the intersections of the lines, indicating that the Nazca may have walked these patterns in ritual processions, perhaps to summon rain from the mountain gods. There is a profound reflective realization that comes with standing on the Nazca Plateau. We often assume that ancient people were limited by their lack of technology, but the Nazca lines prove that they were unlimited in their vision. They didn't need to fly to understand the sky. They used a sophisticated system of grids and chords to scale up small sketches into giant landscapes. They possessed a spatial intelligence that allowed them to see the hummingbird in their minds, even as they stood ankle-deep in the dust of its wings. Today, the lines are more fragile than they appear. Even a single footprint can last for decades, and modern development is a constant threat. The Nazca lines remind us that the Earth is not just a resource, it can be a manuscript. They are a message sent across time, written in the only language that doesn't require words, geometry, and shape. Whether they were maps of the stars, pathways for the gods, or simply a collective prayer for water, they stand as a testament to a people who looked at a barren wasteland and saw a place to hold a conversation with the infinite. As we leave the desert's silent script and ascend into the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Andes, the air grows thin and the world turns vertical. This is the heart of the Inca Empire, or Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters. For the Inca, the mountains weren't just a landscape, they were a living, breathing presence. This philosophy is most vividly etched into the stones of Machu Picchu, a city that feels less like it was built on a mountain and more like it was born from it. But as we walk these high-altitude terraces, we encounter a mystery that transcends beauty. How did a civilization without the wheel, iron tools, or written language achieve an engineering precision that still leaves modern architects in a state of humble disbelief? The Inca were the ultimate masters of stone. In the city of Cusco and the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, you can find the famous 12-angled stone and walls made of massive blocks weighing over 120 tons. These aren't just stacked rocks, they are a sophisticated jigsaw puzzle of grey andesite and diorite. Each stone is shaped with multiple complex angles to interlock perfectly with its neighbours. There is no mortar, no cement, and no glue. The fit is so tight that you cannot slip a razor blade between them. This wasn't just for aesthetics' sake. In an earthquake-prone region, these dancing stones are a stroke of genius. During a tremor, the stones can shift slightly, absorbing the shock before settling back into their original positions. While modern skyscrapers use rubber dampers and high-tech bearings to survive quakes, the Inca achieved the same result using nothing but the weight of the earth and the shape of the stone. The evidence trail regarding their construction methods is surprisingly thin. We are told they used stone hammers and bronze chisels to shape these blocks, and that they moved them using thousands of laborers pulling on fiber ropes. But an internal counter-argument often arises when you stand before a 100-ton block that has been moved across miles of mountainous terrain. Is that enough? Some researchers have suggested that the Inca may have used stone softening techniques, perhaps using acidic plant extracts to make the rock more malleable. Others point to the possibility of using natural resonance or complex levers that have been lost to history. Without the quipu, the knotted string records, to give us a technical manual, we are left to guess how they achieved such mechanical perfection. This sense of mystery follows us to Machu Picchu. Built at nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, the citadel is a masterpiece of stealth architecture. It is invisible from the valley floor, tucked away on a narrow ridge between two sharp peaks. For centuries after the Spanish conquest, it remained a secret, known only to local farmers until it was revealed to the wider world in 1911. Every building here is a conversation with nature. The Intihuatana stone, the hitching post of the sun, is carved directly out of the mountain's bedrock. On the winter solstice, the sun appears to hitch itself to this stone, marking the shortest day of the year. The entire city is a massive solar instrument, aligned to the stars and the seasons. Beyond the grand temples, the Incas' true brilliance lay in their infrastructure. They were the world's greatest mountain hydrologists. At Machu Picchu, an intricate system of stone-lined channels brings fresh spring water through the heart of the city, feeding 16 different fountains before flowing into the agricultural terraces. These terraces weren't just for growing corn and potatoes. They were engineering marvels that prevented the mountain from washing away in the heavy rains. They created microclimates where the stone walls absorbed heat during the day and released it at night, protecting the crops from the freezing mountain air. Machu Picchu was likely a royal estate or a sacred retreat, but its abandonment around 1572 remains a silent enigma. There are no signs of battle or fire. It seems the people simply left, perhaps as the empire collapsed under the weight of civil war and the arrival of smallpox from the coast. A reflective realization settles in as you watch the clouds roll over the ruins. The Inca didn't see themselves as separate from the earth. Their stones don't just sit on the ground, they flow with it. They understood that to build something that lasts, you cannot fight the mountain. You must become part of its strength. Today, Machu Picchu stands as more than a tourist destination. It is a reminder of a different kind of intellect, one that didn't need a written alphabet to record the movement of the sun and didn't need steel to hold up a city. The Inca inherited a legacy of stonecraft that likely stretches back to Tiwanaku and beyond, a memory of how to live in rhythm with the sky. As we leave the peaks and look back at the walls of the Inca, we are left to wonder if we, with all our modern tools, have forgotten the most important lesson they left behind: how to build in harmony with the world rather than at its expense. There is a place in the Andes where the sky and the water seem to be made of the same substance. At over 12,000 feet above sea level, Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable lake on Earth, a vast, shimmering expanse that looks more like a cold inland ocean than a body of fresh water. To the modern traveller, it is a breathtaking landscape. But to the ancient peoples of the Andes, this wasn't just a lake. It was the womb of the world. It was here, according to legend, that the god Viracocha rose from the dark waters to create the sun, the moon, and the first humans. For centuries, these stories were treated as beautiful myths until a team of divers decided to look beneath the surface of the legend. What they found in the year 2000 didn't just support the folklore, it shattered our understanding of Andean history. The curiosity began with whispers from local fishermen who spoke of strange shapes and shadows visible through the clear water on calm days. When an international team of researchers launched the Akakor expedition, they weren't expecting to find a metropolis. Yet 65 feet below the surface, near the island of the sun, the beams of their underwater lights hit something undeniable: stone walls. These weren't rough piles of rock. They were meticulously crafted foundations, paved roads, and a temple complex measuring roughly 650 feet by 160 feet. They found a ceremonial ramp and a stone terrace that seemed to lead toward a forgotten courtyard. This was a structured, sanctified world, now inhabited only by silt and silence. As the artifacts began to reach the surface, a sense of confusion took hold. The team recovered gold fragments, ceramic vessels, and stone carvings that bore the distinct hallmarks of the Tiwanaku culture. The same master stonemasons who built the impossible H-blocks of Pumapunku. But this discovery created a massive problem for the traditional timeline. If these structures belong to the Tiwanaku, who flourished between 500 and 1000 CE, how did they end up at the bottom of the lake? To build a temple 65 feet underwater is impossible. The only logical conclusion is that when these stones were laid, the water wasn't there. This brings us to a period of doubt. Geologists tell us that Lake Titicacas's water levels have fluctuated dramatically over the millennia, but the sheer scale of the rise required to submerge an entire temple complex suggests a cataclysmic shift. Was there a sudden geological event, a massive earthquake that caused the basin to drop? Or was it a slow, agonizing rise in water levels caused by the melting of glacial ice at the end of a forgotten climatic cycle? If the lake was once much smaller, then the entire map of ancient South America needs to be redrawn. We aren't looking at a city built on a shore. We are looking at a civilization that occupied a dry, fertile valley that has since become a watery grave. The wonder of Titicaca lies in its role as a cosmic axis. On the island of the sun and the island of the moon, the Inca and their predecessors built temples that functioned as solar observatories. They carved stone pillars that tracked the solstice sun as it dipped behind the jagged peaks of the Cordillera Real. To these people, the lake was a conduit. Water was the medium through which the divine entered the physical world. By building at the water's edge, and perhaps, as the ruins suggest, in the very heart of the basin, they were anchoring their society to the source of creation. They didn't see the lake as a barrier, but as a mirror reflecting the celestial order. An internal counter-argument often raised by skeptics is that these ruins might be anchored offerings, platforms built on stilts that eventually collapsed. But the presence of paved roads and heavy stone columns suggests a permanent, land-based urban centre. Some independent researchers suggest that these ruins might be even older than Tiwanaku, representing a lost phase of Andean development, where the first experiments in high-altitude engineering were conducted. It suggests that the Inca, with all their mountain-top glory, were merely the final caretakers of a sacred geography that was already thousands of years old when they arrived. As the sun sets over Titicaca, the water turns a deep, bruised purple. A quiet realization settles over the shore. We like to think of history as a solid thing, carved in stone and recorded in books, but Titicaca reminds us that history is fluid. It can be drowned. It can be buried under layers of sediment and forgotten for 1,000 years. The lake hasn't hidden these ruins to keep them from us. It has preserved them. It has acted as a cold, liquid vault, holding on to the foundations of a world that once knew how to speak to the stars. The submerged stones of Titicaca are a challenge to our modern arrogance. They remind us that we are not the first to build empires or seek the divine in the landscape. We are simply the latest to stand on the shore, looking out over the water and wondering what lies beneath. The lake refuses to give up all its secrets at once, choosing instead to reveal them in fragments, a gold mask here, a stone staircase there, reminding us that the most profound parts of our story are often the ones we cannot see. As we pull our gaze away from the submerged stone staircases of Lake Titicaca, we must confront a different kind of architecture, not one of heavy rock, but of delicate fiber. When the Spanish first marched into the heart of the Andes, they were looking for gold, but they stumbled upon a miracle of organization. They found an empire that stretched over 2,500 miles, managed with a precision that would have made a Roman tax collector weep with envy. Yet they saw no books, they found no scrolls. To the European mind, the Inca were illiterate, but as the conquerors watched the local administrators work, They realized they were witnessing a sophisticated form of data processing that used no ink at all. This was the quipu, a mathematical and narrative code of memory that remains one of the greatest undeciphered languages of the ancient world. At its most basic level, a quipu is a bundle of strings. It consists of a thick, horizontal cord from which hundreds of smaller, colorful strings hang like a fringe. To the uninitiated, it looks like a simple, decorative object. But in the hands of a quipu kamayok, the keeper of the knots, it became a high-density hard drive. By tying specific knots at varying intervals, the Inca could record a staggering amount of information. They used a decimal-based system with the position of the knot representing units, tens, hundreds, and thousands. The absence of a knot was just as important. It functioned as a zero, a mathematical concept that many advanced civilizations in Europe and Asia struggled to master for centuries. The evidence trail of the quipu is a study in tactile complexity. It wasn't just about the knots. Every detail was a carrier of meaning, the direction of the string's twist, the material used, and most importantly, the color. A red string might represent warfare or the military. A yellow string could symbolize gold or corn. A white string might denote peace or silver. By combining these variables, the quipu kamayoks could maintain a real-time census of every household in the empire, track the contents of every state storehouse, and manage the logistics of an army on the move. They were the world's first big data analysts, reading the strings with their fingers as much as their eyes. However, a deeply intriguing contradictory thread has emerged in recent years. For a long time, we believed quipus was strictly for numbers, glorified abacuses, but many surviving quipus don't fit the mathematical mold. Their knot patterns are irregular, almost rhythmic. This has led scholars to a radical hypothesis. Was the quipu a form of non-phonetic writing? Could you write a poem or a history in knots? Some 17th century chroniclers noted that Inca elders could recount the entire history of their lineage by running their hands along the strings. If this is true, the Inca possessed a tactile literature, a way of storing the soul of their culture in a medium that could survive the damp mountain air better than paper ever could. This brings us to a reflective, almost tragic realization. The Spanish, fearing what they couldn't understand, labeled the quipus as idolatrous or works of the devil. They burned thousands of them in massive bonfires, effectively deleting the hard drive of an entire civilization. When the last quipu kamayoks died without passing on their secrets, the key to the code was lost. We are left with about 900 surviving quipus, silent and brittle. We can see the knots, but we can no longer hear the melody they were meant to play. It is as if we found a library where all the books are locked and the keys were tossed into the sea. Today, the mystery of the quipu is entering the digital age. Researchers are using artificial intelligence and machine learning to analyze the knot patterns, looking for the underlying grammar of the strings. They are cross-referencing the quipus with early Spanish colonial records to see if a numeric string matches a known census count. We are slowly learning to read the numbers, but the stories, the myths of Viracocha, the epics of the Sapa Incas, the sacred laws of the Andes, remain tied in those ancient fibers, just out of reach. The quipu reminds us that intelligence is not limited to the page. The Inca lived in a world of touch, rhythm, and three-dimensional relationships. They didn't need to write their history in ink because they had a way to tie it into the very fabric of their lives. When we look at a quipu today, we shouldn't see a primitive tool. We should see a challenge to our own narrow definition of literacy. It is a reminder that some of the most profound truths of the human experience aren't found in what we see, but in what we can hold in our hands. The knots are still there, waiting for us to find the right way to touch them. For centuries, the story of the discovery of the Americas was a neat, closed book. It began in 1492 with Spanish sails on the horizon, but history has a way of leaking through the seams of official narratives. Long before the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, there were other ships, smaller, swifter, and driven by a different kind of hunger. These were the long ships of the Northmen. For a long time, the idea of Vikings in North America was treated as a colourful myth, a collection of tall tales from the Icelandic sagas. But in the 1960s, the ground in Newfoundland, Canada, finally gave up its secrets. On a lonely, windswept peninsula called Lanceau Meadows, the myth became a physical, undeniable reality. The evidence trail began not with gold, but with iron. At the site, archaeologists unearthed the remains of 8 sod-walled buildings, identical in style to Norse longhouses found in Greenland and Iceland. More importantly, they found a blacksmith's forge and a collection of iron boat nails. This was the smoking gun. The indigenous peoples of North America at that time did not practice iron smelting. The presence of slag and worked iron meant that someone from across the Atlantic had brought the technology of the forge to the Western world nearly 500 years before Columbus. The sagas, specifically the saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders, offer a narrative map of these voyages. They tell of Leif Erikson, a man of restless ambition who sailed west from Greenland around the year 1000 CE. He was looking for a land sighted by a previous storm-blown traveller. He found 3 distinct regions: Helluland, land of flat stones; Markland, land of forests; and finally, Vinland, land of wine. For decades, historians argued over where Vinland actually was. The discovery at Lanceau Meadows placed a firm marker on the map, but it also raised a new question. Was this small camp the legendary Vinland, or was it merely a way station for journeys even farther south? A contradictory thread appears when we look at the biological evidence. Among the artifacts found in the Newfoundland camp were butternuts, a type of walnut that has never grown in Newfoundland. The nearest place they grow is in the St. Lawrence River Valley or even farther south in New Brunswick and Maine. This suggests that the Vikings weren't just huddled on a cold Canadian shore, they were exploring deep into the heart of the continent. They were finding wild grapes and warmer climates, just as the sagas described. They were seeing a world that was supposed to be undiscovered, and they were living in it. Yet, despite their incredible seafaring skills and their established camp, the Vikings didn't stay. The sagas speak of increasing friction with the Skraelings, the Norse term for the local indigenous people. The Vikings were outnumbered and thousands of miles from the reinforcements of Greenland. In a world where a broken rudder or a bad harvest meant certain death, the isolation became too much. Within a few years, or perhaps a few decades, they packed their iron tools, burned their temporary shelters, and sailed back into the mist of the North Atlantic. They left behind a few rusted nails and a story that Europe would eventually choose to forget. There is a reflective, almost haunting quality to this failed colony. Unlike the later European arrivals, the Vikings didn't come with an empire at their back. They weren't looking to plant flags or convert souls. They were explorers and opportunists, moving through the landscape like ghosts. This forces us to reconsider our entire framework of contact. If the Vikings could make it to Newfoundland in open-decked boats, who else might have crossed the oceans? We see stone statues in Mexico with features that seem out of place. We find traces of sweet potatoes in Polynesia that originated in South America. We see ancient maps that hint at coastlines that shouldn't have been known. The Viking presence at Lanceau Meadows reminds us that history is not a straight line of progress. It is a series of pulses, voyages that were made, meetings that occurred, and bridges that were built only to be reclaimed by the sea. The discovery of America wasn't a single event in 1492. It was a process of repeated, forgotten encounters. The Vikings were just one chapter in a much longer book of human curiosity. When we stand on the cliffs of Newfoundland today and look out at the churning grey water, we realize that the Atlantic was never a barrier. It was a highway. The rusted nails of Lanceau Meadows are more than just archaeological finds. They are a challenge to our certainty. They tell us that for every story we know, there are 10 others buried in the soil, waiting for us to be brave enough to look for them. The Vikings didn't lose America, they simply moved through it, leaving us to wonder how many other footsteps are still hidden beneath the grass. As we move beyond the wooden longhouses of the Vikings, we find ourselves standing before a wall of silence. For over a century, the history of the world has been taught as a series of isolated events, continents separated by vast, impassable oceans until the age of discovery. But when we step out of the classroom and into the back rooms of museums, a different story begins to emerge. It is a story told in out-of-place artifact items that simply shouldn't exist according to our official timeline. These are the whispers of ancient migrations and forgotten trade routes. They are the clues that suggest the world was never as disconnected as we've been told. The evidence trail takes an unsettling turn in a laboratory in Germany. In 1992, toxicologist Svetlana Balabanova was testing the remains of Henut Tawi, an Egyptian priestess who lived over 3,000 years ago. To her shock, the tests came back positive for nicotine and cocaine. These substances are derived from tobacco and coca plants, species that were only found in the Americas until the late 15th century. This wasn't an isolated result. Dozens of other Egyptian mummies tested positive for the same chemical signatures. This discovery created a firestorm of contradictory threads. Mainstream scholars immediately looked for alternative explanations. Perhaps the samples were contaminated by modern smokers, or maybe there were lost varieties of these plants in Africa that have since gone extinct. But the chemical reality remains. If these priestesses were using American plants, it implies a trans-oceanic trade network that existed 3 millennia before Columbus. Instead of investigating how such a crossing was made, the academic community largely turned away. It was a truth that didn't fit the framework, so the framework pushed it into the shadows. But Egypt isn't the only place where the pieces don't fit. In the humid jungles of Veracruz, the Olmec colossal heads stare back at us with features that have puzzled observers for a century. They possess broad noses and full lips that bear a striking resemblance to West African populations. While many archaeologists argue these are merely stylized local faces, others point to the Atlantic currents. The Canary Current and the North Equatorial Current act like a conveyor belt, leading directly from the coast of Africa to the Gulf of Mexico. In 1970, explorer Thor Heyerdahl proved this was possible. He built Ra-2, a boat made of papyrus reeds based on ancient Egyptian designs, and successfully sailed it from Morocco to Barbados. He wasn't trying to prove that it did happen, only that the technology of the ancient world was more than capable of surviving the journey. He showed that the ocean wasn't a wall, it was a highway. On the Pacific side, the clues are just as persistent. In the 1960s, a Smithsonian archaeologist named Betty Meggers noticed a bizarre similarity between the pottery of the Valdivia culture in Ecuador and the Jomon pottery of ancient Japan. Both cultures used the same distinct comb marking and finger grooving techniques, and they appeared in Ecuador around 3000 BCE, completely fully formed with no local precursors. This led to the theory that a Japanese fishing vessel might have been caught in the Kuroshio Current and swept across the Pacific. To many, this sounds like a fringe theory, yet the mathematical probability of such a drift is higher than we realize. We find these echoes everywhere if we are willing to look. We see 5th century Chinese records describing a land called Fusang to the far east, a place with giant trees and red-skinned people. We see the Calavera's skull and other finds that suggest a much more diverse human presence in the ancient Americas. This isn't about one discovery replacing another. It is about a reflective realization that human history is not a straight line of progress. It is a tangled web of curiosity and courage. Today, we are at a crossroads. We can continue to dismiss these artifacts as anomalies or coincidences, or we can admit that our map of the past is incomplete. Cultural contact doesn't always leave behind an empire or a written language. Sometimes it leaves behind a specific way of weaving a basket, a half-remembered legend of visitors from the West, or a trace of plant medicine in the hair of a priestess. The story of the Americas is not a story of isolation. It is a story of a global world that was open and exploratory long before we gave it a name. As we look at these overlooked fragments, we realize that the greatest mystery isn't who crossed the ocean, it's why we've spent so much time pretending they didn't. The oceans were never barriers, they were bridges, and the people of the ancient world were far more connected than we have ever dared to imagine. As we dismantle the idea of a disconnected world, we must face the most controversial, out-of-place artifact of all: a stone blade. For decades, the story of the first Americans was simple. Hunters from Siberia walked across the Bering Land Bridge into Alaska roughly 13,000 years ago. They carried the Clovis point, a distinct, fluted stone spearhead. But as we dig deeper into the eastern coast of the United States, we are finding tools that look like they belong in a different time and a different continent. This is the foundation of the Solutrean hypothesis. It suggests that more than 20,000 years ago, Stone Age hunters from Western Europe may have crossed the Atlantic, following the edge of a massive ice sheet to reach the Americas. The evidence trail begins in the caves of France and Spain, the home of the Solutrean culture. Between 22,000 and 17,000 years ago, these people were the master craftsmen of the Paleolithic world. They produced laurel leaf blades, thin, symmetrical masterpieces of flint knapping that required incredible skill to create without shattering the stone. When archaeologists first looked at these Solutrean blades alongside North American Clovis points, the similarity was jarring. Both use a highly specific overshot flaking technique that is rare elsewhere in the world. Proponents of the theory argue that this isn't a coincidence. They believe the Solutrean technology didn't just resemble Clovis, it became Clovis. To cross the Atlantic during the height of the Ice Age seems like a suicide mission, but the environmental reality of 20,000 years ago offers a different perspective. At that time, a massive ice shelf extended from Europe to North America. This wasn't a barren void, it was a maritime highway. Much like the modern Inuit, Solutrean hunters could have lived on the edge of the ice, hunting seals, nesting birds, and fish. They wouldn't have needed massive ships. Hide-covered boats, similar to kayaks or umiaks, would have been enough to skirt the frozen frontier. With sea levels nearly 400 feet lower than they are today, the distance between the two continents was significantly shorter, and the bridge was made of ice rather than land. However, a fierce contradictory thread exists in the realm of genetics. For years, skeptics pointed out that modern Native American DNA shows a clear, dominant link to East Asia, not Europe. But in 2014, the genetic profile of the Anzac I child, a 12,600-year-old boy found in Montana, added a layer of confusion. While his DNA was certainly Siberian, it also contained a significant portion of ancient North Eurasian ancestry. This specific genetic marker is shared by Upper Paleolithic Europeans. It suggests that the people who first entered the Americas were not a single, uniform group, but a complex mosaic of lineages that had already mixed in the deep past. The most tangible evidence for the Solutrean theory lies at the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay. In 1974, a scallop trawler named the Sinmar pulled up a mastodon tusk and a large bifacial stone knife from the seabed. When the tusk was finally dated decades later, it was found to be 22,000 years old. The knife was made of a specific type of rheolite found only in the Appalachian Mountains, but its shape and craftsmanship were purely Solutrean. Since the knife and the tusk were found together in a layer of sediment that had been dry land during the Ice Age, it suggests that hunters were active on the east coast of America 9,000 years before the Clovis people supposedly arrived. The reaction to this hypothesis has been visceral. In the world of archaeology, the Bering Strait model is more than a theory, it is an institution. To suggest a European entry is often met with swift, sometimes emotional rejection. It disrupts the neat, linear narrative of American discovery and raises uncomfortable questions about identity and the ownership of history. But the Solutrean hypothesis doesn't seek to replace the Siberian migration, it seeks to add to it. It suggests a braided history where multiple groups arriving from different directions and at different times all contributed to the story of the continent. A reflective realization settles in when we look at these ancient blades. We often underestimate the courage of the prehistoric mind. We assume that without metal or maps they were prisoners of their geography. But the Solutreans were people who lived at the edge of the world, staring out at the white horizon. They were driven by the same courageous curiosity that led the Vikings to Newfoundland and the Polynesians to Eastern Island. Today, the Solutrean theory remains a puzzle with missing pieces. We have the tools, we have the ice, and we have the tantalizing traces of DNA. We are waiting for that one definitive find, a burial or a campsite, to turn the hypothesis into history. Until then, these stone blades remain silent witnesses to a journey we are only beginning to imagine. They remind us that the first Americans didn't just walk into a new world. They may have paddled, climbed, and hunted their way across an ocean of ice, writing the first forgotten chapter of the American story in the frost of the Atlantic. We have traveled across the vast red deserts of the American Southwest. We have waded through the humid, green shadows of the Amazon. We have stood on the freezing, wind-swept cliffs of Newfoundland. Throughout this journey, a recurring pattern has emerged. We find a stone structure built with impossible precision. An artifact surfaces from a geological layer that defies its supposed age. An ancient map reveals a coastline that shouldn't have been discovered for centuries. Each of these finds feels like a stray puzzle piece from a picture we have already framed. When these pieces don't fit, the response is rarely a sense of wonder. More often, it is a long silence or a dismissive frown. We tell ourselves that it simply cannot be. Within the halls of modern knowledge, some assumptions have become foundational. These ideas are the bedrock of how we understand our species. We assume that progress is a straight line. We believe that we are the smartest people to ever walk the earth. Over time, these beliefs become so stable that we no longer think to question them. When a discovery contradicts this stability, it is quietly filed away. We label it as an anomaly, we call it an outlier, we treat it as a curious mistake that doesn't quite matter to the larger story. No grand conspiracy is required to keep these secrets hidden. Sometimes the quiet comfort of keeping things in order is enough. We like our history books to be neat. We want the timeline to have a clear beginning and a predictable middle. When something extraordinary appears, it threatens the official narrative. It challenges the work of those who spent their lives building that story. It is easier to ignore a difficult truth than it is to rebuild the entire house. Because of this, the most profound chapters of our past often remain on the cutting room floor. If we are brave enough to look again, the picture changes. we can begin to see that human history is not a single, narrow path. It is a complex, braided tapestry. It is interwoven and overlapping. It is far more intricate than we were ever taught in school. When we accept the impossible artifacts, we give history its true depth. We acknowledge that the ancient world was a place of vibrant connection. It was a world of courageous explorers and master engineers who lived in rhythm with the cosmos. This journey has shown us that the discovery of the Americas happened many times. It happened in the frost of the Ice Age. It happened in the longships of the Northmen. It happened in the garden cities of the Amazon. These were not isolated incidents, they were pulses of a global human story. When we stop rejecting what doesn't fit, we allow the puzzle to finally come together. We begin to see a world where oceans were bridges and the stars were a shared language. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. It has been a long walk through the shadows of the past. I hope these forgotten echoes have found a way to reach you. I hope they have stirred something in your heart. May you carry this curiosity with you as you move through your own world. History is not just behind us. It is beneath us and within us. It is a story that is still being written, one discovery at a time. I wish you a peaceful night. May your dreams be filled with a past that never disappeared. May they be filled with the wonder of a world that is much older and much deeper than we ever imagined.